You're listening to the Animal Heartbeat. My name is Kieran Bourget.
Hi, and I'm Jose Nobumatos. This is the world's only podcast dedicated to veterinary cardiology. Hi, welcome everyone to the Animal Heartbeat, your veterinary cardiology podcast. Today we have with us another very special guest, Mike Martin. Mike Martin is an interventional cardiologist and RCVS Diploma holder, which has really pioneered interventional cardiology in the UK and Europe. Mike, thanks very much for being here with us today.
Oh, thanks very much for having me. It's looking forward to it. So I'll be interested to see where the conversation leads us.
Mike has achieved many different things in his career, but when I hear his name, the first thing that always comes to my mind is really his outstanding ECG book, Small Animal ECGs. If I can share, I knew nothing about ECGs when I finished vet school, and it's just, I couldn't understand it. And then I found a copy of Mike's book, and it's really, really good. It made me really passionate about ECGs, and I, after reading the book, which I think I read in one afternoon because it's so easy to read and go through, I learned a lot about ECG. So I would really recommend everyone, if anyone has not read this book yet, to go and check Mike's book, because it's really amazing.
It's interesting that you're talking about the ECG book. I can give you a bit of history on that if you want.
We'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
So, when I was young and a young specialist diplomate in cardiology and promoting my business here, my own practice, we did a lot of lecturing, massive amount of lecturing. And one of the courses was a one-day course in ECGs. And I developed, and I would do this twice a year for, 10 years. And then other people would ask me to do it as well. But basically it was evolved around alternating an hour of lecture with an hour of practical, where I gave them a whole pile of ECGs on a handout and went around the class helping them go through things. And then with another hour of lecture, another hour of practical going through. And so it alternated like that, and then finished off with a lecture. And then after a while, that, like you do with every lecture, every time you're about to give it again, you evolve it and you think, I could say that better, I could do this better, I could tweak that. It always continues to evolve. To the point I thought, actually, this is a nice little, you can always do a little book in this. And so I mentioned it to Blackwell, who had published the other book, the Cardiorespiratory Notebook. And they says, oh yeah, let's talk about that. And we did that. We did then the first edition, which was okay. And then this edition is now the third edition, I think, and it's in color as well, and it's slightly bigger. But that book has evolved from those courses that I gave. And it's just a way of teaching in a very pragmatic way. And most books can go into detail. Once you lose a listener, you've lost them and they stop learning. So you've got to find a way to not give so much detail that you lose them, but enough information that brings them along with you to get there. So there are some caveats and little sort of footnotes that caveat things in the book for the purist that reads it, the knowledgeable cardiologist that reads it, but for the basic person, it gets people through. And I find ECGs really hard when I was young. So it's a very basic introduction book. I'm not an expert in advanced ECGs at all, but I can sort of give the basic introduction to people learning ECG, if that makes sense.
I think the impact of that one book is massive, because many people have got it, have read it, were inspired by it, were guided by it early on in their career. And I think people now can, it's in every clinic. Well,
I've no idea how impactful it's been, actually, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, these are the times you really wish the royalties for books were really more like royalties for a movie or something, because it's. I think the impact is unbelievable. It's a massive contribution in itself.
Well,
it's really,
I still get some royalties, but it's not very much.
No. It's interesting to hear that when you put the book together, actually, you'd started your journey from a place of not feeling very confident in it. I think that's something that a lot of people can identify with.
For sure. And it was a way of, it's only when you've got an audience in front of you, you've got 30 vets in front of you trying to understand. And when you give a lecture, if they follow you or don't follow you, you can see that and you can engage, and by the questions. And then just basically the whole thing evolved over many, many years.
And you mentioned there your practice that you were running at the time, the Veterinary Cardiorespiratory Centre up in Kenilworth. Tell us a little bit about that and how you started that work and evolved that. Because I think I'm right in saying that it was the only private practice with cardiology specialty for a long time. Is that right?
Yeah. It was the first specialist cardiology practice in private practice. Yeah. So I got my diploma in Edinburgh University, as you know,
Mm.
and did my diploma then. Got that before the residency was up, which was maybe which was a great thing in those days. But I also knew from the atmosphere within the university system that the interdepartmental sort of helping each other wasn't existent. And that politics of the whole university academic world I really didn't enjoy. I just wanted to be a clinician. I wanted to speak to owners. I wanted to do the best, and everyone work together. So I knew I was leaving university. So, and me and my wife decided, where in the world can we do this? Because we'll be the first. And I remember speaking prior to that, a few years prior to that, to John Bonagura and saying, in America, no one has yet made cardiology a private referral business yet in America at that stage, and they're only just starting. No one's really succeeded, but clearly they have. So we were conscious of finding a location with a population that it would work. So we knew we had to come down to Middle England, either London, Birmingham, or the South Coast, that sort of thing. And that was in Coventry, and they had Harry Scott doing orthopedics and Richard Harvey doing dermatology, and I came on and worked in their practice in Coventry, and because it was starting from scratch and I had no income, I did some small animal work while I was doing that. And then my wife was also a vet, so she was doing some locum work, but we had a young child at that stage, so she was limited what she was doing. And yeah, we just gradually built it up. And by 3 years, I think my net profit in the first year was like £7,000. I don't know how we lived off that between us. But then then it quickly mushroomed. In 3 years, I'd outgrown the place. And I was saying, is there any chance of doing an extension? I need more space, blah, blah, blah. And we realized that wasn't going to happen. And we started looking for a premises. And we just, I know while we were looking, we probably spent a year looking. We just happened upon a place from a friend of a friend's. And, well, did you see that place on Waverley Road? That might suit you guys. And we went and looked at it. Thought, well, it's a detached building on a residential street, but it already had planning for offices. And then went through planning permission to change it to a vet's. Yeah, we just bit the bullet and then moved in, and then started gradually. I had the ultrasound machine was an Interspec in those days, which was a nice Doppler. It had the Vingmed Doppler in those days. But yeah, once we get going and we expanded, we bought more and more equipment. A lot of equipment I bought was secondhand because we couldn't afford new equipment for everything. And it was fine. And then just gradually developed it, and then got a X-ray machine that had fluoro. We had already started doing some balloons at Edinburgh before I left, and we tried to do some PDAs, which didn't fail. God knows how they failed, but in hindsight, but they failed. And so gradually then I was speaking to, I remember speaking at Congress. I was speaking at basically Congress. I think it was Dave Sissons who was doing coiling of PDAs, and had big, and he was very generous at his time. He spent ages and talked to him, and I spoke to Virginia, who was been to America and done that sort of stuff. I went and said to an old colleague, a medical colleague up at Edinburgh, we'd linked in with a medicine guy, says, is there anyone doing paediatric cardiology that I go and see practice with? And I was put in touch with a chap at the Children's Hospital in Birmingham, Joe De Giovanni, who's now passed, unfortunately. He retired not long after he retired. He was an amazing guy. He took me under his wing. I just brought a big box of biscuits, stayed behind the X-ray screens, and would walk into this theater. And then I was there literally once or twice a week, every month.
Wow.
For a while, and then every month for a couple of years, and just learning and absorbing and watching and watching his registrars learn. And I think you learn more from watching people learn because they make mistakes. And he comes along and does it like as swift as that, even just accessing a femoral artery in a child, whatever it is. It's just remarkable, the skill he had. But yeah, it just gradually evolved. So I bought all the kit and then did my first coils, and that was as scary as anything. And worked away. But in those days, they had moved on already to Amplats. And so, and we did that all venously, of course, in those days. So I learned to do PDAs venously first. Yeah.
You won't remember, of course, Mike, but I went to visit your center, I think in 2005. And I was, again, in Lisbon as a young grad, and I heard, there is this specialist cardiology center in the UK. So I email you. Yeah, I think we had emails at the time. I emailed you, and then you very kindly said, "Yeah, sure, you can come and visit." And I was there I spent time with you and Mike Johnson for a week. And
Right.
honestly, your setup was visionary, because is exactly the same as any big referral practice you visit nowadays in Europe and in the US. The way you had everything set up was really outstanding. And on that week, 2005, I have never in my life seen a cardiology intervention. You implanted a pacemaker, you occluded a PDA, and you dilated the quadriatum dexter, which I
Wow.
even didn't know what was a
Strong start.
quadriatum dexter. I was like, what is this? I went to my Kittleson's book to read what is a quadriatum dexter. And honestly, it was so inspiring. And you had like certificate holders going there and learning with you. You had all those X-rays. We can went through the X-rays and so on.
Yes.
So it was amazing. So congratulations on that
Thanks.
project, because that's absolutely visionary.
But it was good fun having people visit. I enjoyed the company, and then a lot of people came in Erasmus in those days and that sort of thing, grants all around. But also just, certificate holders in the UK, people studying the certificate came around. And it was good for me. I enjoyed the interaction of students learning around me. I enjoyed that interaction. And maybe you saw that, but yeah, I encouraged it and supported that, and it was good fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. The only thing you told me, I asked, can I visit? And you said yes, but you need to cook a Portuguese dish on a Friday. And honestly, my cooking skills are still horrible. So I had to learn how to cook some codfish, and my mother taught me, and I brought codfish and olive oil in my bag and so on. It was a mess. And I think you were all very kind, but I'm not sure you really enjoyed my codfish.
Yeah.
It's interesting. When I visited, I wasn't asked to cook a local dish from Derby, so I'm not sure why that was.
Yeah, it was just the people from Europe that we asked that for. But I think if I remember, Brigitte Pedro also did the salted cod dish.
Brigitte's codfish is much better than mine, for sure.
Yeah. We had some good cooks. Alfredo, the Spanish guy, he was a great cook. His father was a butcher, but he's a great cook as well. And he taught us all sorts of things. I remember once he accidentally hit in his car driving to us a pheasant roadkill, and the next thing on the Friday we had pheasant Spanish stew.
Wow, the insights you must have into generations of cardiologists now working across Europe is quite.
I should. In hindsight, I should have kept a visitor guest book with photographs of who all was there.
Oh, can you imagine?
That would have been fun in hindsight, wouldn't it?
In hindsight, at the time, it's one of those things that you think, what's this about? But exactly. 20 years down the line, amazing. Yeah, I think the work that you've done with interventional cardiology and not just doing the cases, but talking about the work, promoting it, teaching people, has been hugely inspirational to lots of people. And I think, compared to 30 years ago, the number of interventions happening in the UK now is massive.
It's crazy, isn't it?
Huge. And I know that part of your work now that you're doing is supporting the training of new centres across the UK and Europe. Tell us a little bit about that and how that compares to learning yourself and where that's taken you.
Yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, I would say I learned most of how to perform most of this from watching at the Children's Hospital. So that's what I learned. So I learned in the medical way. But I also learned from just talking to our friends in VCS, or any congresses where somebody was doing something. I talked to the Americans if they're over, and just picking brains. And then it's just doing and practicing as well, isn't it? And we did have some, medical cardiologists come to our practice to do some stuff, when we're trying a new product or a new thing. Once we then got going, so to speak, and people were seeing practice, I can't remember who was first or how it started, but somebody had been working in Britain and then gone home. And I don't know whether it was like Liva Vatna in Oslo, or it was Nicole van Israel in Belgium, or it was Jakob Williamson at Copenhagen Vet School. Yeah, I did an Infinity course on the interventions, and he was at that course. Anyway, in conversations with any of those people, I said, yeah, everyone would come and teach, you'll do. So eventually somebody said, would you come and do it? And I would fly with the whole kit that I needed, everything I would bring. and I would
Right.
just charge them a fee for that kit, a fixed price, and I charge them a fee, and they'd pay my bed and breakfast, and unless they put me up, of course. So I just started going to these different places, Oslo, Copenhagen, Belgium, and started doing these places. And it was interesting. It's always interesting to go to different places, and everything didn't always go well. Maybe a fluoro would die, for example, but generally everything worked out well. And that's how it developed, really. And then when I left, when I was bought and left Willows, and I was thinking, where am I going to go next? Again, in conversation with people at VCS, like Dave Dixon and crew, he was saying they want to get into interventions where I teach them. So I said, yeah, sure, that's fine. So once I left Willows, sorted the kit list, helped them find a fluoro machine. Basically, what happens then is, and this is happening now, so I now have a new clinic. They want to start interventions. So we just, for the last year, 6 months a year, we go through kit lists. It's now much more refined than it was back in those days. But I have a kit list of what I like to use. And I say, here's your kit list. Buy all that, and they would the head nurse would WhatsApp me every so often and say, do you mean this? Do you mean that? Which one of these two? That sort of thing. And we'd get that all organized. And so then I'll go and we'll run through. I have a checklist now for everything. And then we'll run through how it's going to work. I'll scan the dog and measure for myself. So measurement's a big issue we should talk about in everything. I'd measure whatever it is, the PDA, the pulmonic stenosis myself on the scan. And then we go to anesthesia. And I would, for the first few that we do, and they may take some months because generally we only do one a day in new places because everything's so slow. I would just do a demo. So if I'm doing a PDA tomorrow, I'll go along. This is how we do it. I'll say what I'm doing and just do a demo. Someone will be scrubbed in with me, holding things, obviously. The nurse will be learning all the vocabulary, and the vocabulary is massive for people who've never come across all this stuff.
It's huge, isn't it?
It's massive. And we'll work through it, and then it'll be rabbits in the headlight for the first 3 or 4. They'll hardly remember anything. It's quite remarkable. But gradually, over time, the vocabulary gets familiar. It's like learning a new language. They gradually get it. The nurse gets it. And then I'll get the assistant to do a bit more, whatever it's going to be. Say it's going to be a cut down the femoral artery or a jugular or a catheterization. I just gradually do little bits, and then clearly that will occasionally not go well. And I have to step in and say, do it this way, and we just gradually evolve it where they become the leader and I'll become the assistant. So I've a distinct roles of what a leader does and what an assistant does. We distinct, and so it's a very efficient way of doing it. And then gradually, once they've led and my assistance is much less, I'll get somebody else to assist and I'll stay in theatre and watch. So our assistant learns, and then those two will swap alternating roles, and I'll just be watching for a while. And then, depending on the confidence of the people, some people will learn within a year, some people will take 2 or 3 years. Everyone's different. It depends how frequently they're doing them as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then ultimately, just be there in case there's a disaster. So they didn't get involved.
Safety blanket.
It's exactly a safety blanket. And you do get called for a critical thing, like a measurement is a critical thing.
Yes.
You called in and say, can you just double check our measurement before we do this? Or that sort of thing. Or something weird would be, or there's be something oddball about something and they've not seen it.
So it sounds quite structured, and I think that structure is important. And it's clearly not just see one, do one, teach one.
Oh, it takes a while, yeah, for sure. It takes a long time. I don't know, and everyone has a different learning pace.
Yes.
I also teach hepatic shunt closure as well.
Yeah.
And what I find is in the personality types of medicine, cardiology, and soft tissue surgeons, they have a scale of confidence, let's put it that way. And surgeons are very confident. And we had a center in Paris. I think I showed her 2 shunts, and she said, "I can do this," and she's off and running by herself. And she was very skilled. And the only worry I have is the manipulation of the catheter to get where you need to go. And that's the difficult skill. But clearly she's I talked to her since, and they've done quite a few since. But other places, I've done places where we've done 20 or 30 PDAs and they still are not confident. So everyone has a different level of skill set, and it gets there. Everyone gets there eventually.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you think there are centres out there who actually won't make it to being fully independent interventionists?
I think with the right training, everyone should be able to get there.
Hmm.
And I suppose, and unless you're completely cack-handed, um,
And most vets aren't, are they?
no, most vets are quite skilled in that sort of thing, you see. So, and yeah, we're very good at adapting and compromising, and most people are good, but some will just take a bit longer than others. Yeah.
I think, as you sort of alluded to, there are critical points in the procedure, one of which is measurement, and
Yes.
another of which is just troubleshooting.
Yes, absolutely.
When
Yeah, yeah.
something doesn't.
Problem solving.
Right, yeah, absolutely. And okay, I need to get here, and what I'm doing isn't working.
Yeah, yeah.
What can I do instead? What do I
Well,
have in my toolkit that I can
yeah,
use?
yeah.
And that's a much more difficult skill to learn, isn't it?
It is. Yeah,
It's just
yeah.
cases under your belt, I suppose.
And problem solving, it depends what the problem is. Sometimes it can be imminently life-threatening, and you need the problem solved
Mm.
very, very quickly. So I remember once we were doing a balloon and a pulmonary stenosis in a place that didn't have the right needle-free injector that I'd like to use, and they gave me another one that we thought should work, but it didn't. So when we inflated the balloon and I tried to deflate it through this needle-free valve, it didn't deflate. And for a moment, for that split second, you think, why is this not deflating? It should deflate. And then you realize, they've given me not what I wanted. And we had to disconnect it. Meanwhile, that balloon is still sitting inflated for maybe 5 seconds longer than it should have been.
That's
But you have to just
stressful.
problem solve very quickly. And so, yeah, you need that sort of, I don't know, problem solving skill set and that sort of stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, that's why I think the setup you just described, the way you teach vets is fantastic, and I think that's great lessons for all of us training residents, because we went through all the steps from leading, then to be the assistant, then to just oversee, and then to just stay there to help with those critical decisions. Because that requires a lot of experience, and they need to have seen many different things and many different complications to know quickly how to figure them out. So I think it's really cool what you described, and very useful for us to translate that into residency training. You touch a bit about your path on PDA occlusion, from coils, implants, duct occluders. Can you tell us a bit about your experience over the years? What has changed in interventional cardiology from PDAs, pulmonary balloon valvuloplasty? Were there any milestones, anything that you feel like, well, this changed markedly. This was a major milestone. This is very different from how I used to do, and stuff like that.
I suppose the Amplatzer is the main milestone with PDAs. I mean, we started off doing coils. And I remember when I was presenting the early coil work, the coils with big ducts would never fully occlude things. But the shunt flow would reduce significantly, by 80, 90%. And the heart would remodel back to a normal size in most cases, despite there being an audible grade 2, 3, or 4 PDA murmur. And despite there being that shunt, they would normalize and the dogs would do very well. So, but when I presented that work, because it wasn't a complete occlusion, I don't think it was accepted, and it was perceived as being a bit out there and radical, I guess. And I've got to think of where I was then to what people are doing now, which I think that seems radical, but then maybe I was radical in those days. So you've got to be open in that sense. So, and then in the human world, they brought in the ADOs. And I was watching them do that, and I thought, God, I need to do that. And we didn't have the canine Amplatzer in those days, so we decided we would give that a go in dogs. And the paediatric cardiologist came to my place, and the company provided a selection of ADOs, and so he helped me do the first one in a dog, and it was very different for him because our ducts compared to human ducts, our dogs are big, fat, dilated ducts compared to
it's completely different,
completely
isn't it?
different. Completely different mechanism as well, isn't it? So, and we did that successfully. And then I went and watched quite a few more ADOs in children, and then realized once you've done one yourself with him, you now tune into the fine tune of what you need to be looking at. And so then I watched that, and then we did more, and then we switched to ADOs, and they were really expensive. I think those ADOs back in those days were still £1,200, but that's what we charged it out at. They were really expensive. But they were a game changer, and I was really trying to push all the owners away from coils at that point because they were so good at doing this. And then, obviously, is it Minnesota brought out the ACDO?
That's right.
And that was the next game changer. That was an affordable thing, and that came in at really cheap. That was like, was it $400 or $500 or $600?
Yes, it's
It was
more than that
really cheap.
now. Crikey.
And unfortunately, the Me Too product from Korea is the quality. We bought one of those, and I looked at it, and there's threads hanging out, there's bits of wire hanging out, sticking out. I have photographs of what, and it's just scary.
Yeah.
I never implanted it.
It's so hard because it's a completely unregulated market.
Yes, yes,
No one can say, well, you can't use that device
yeah,
because it's a device and it falls between the cracks. I
yeah,
think that the Veterinary Surgeons Act in this country covers us a little bit for the whole is it experimental or not. And I think that does provide a bit of caution, or should provide a bit of caution, I think.
mm,
Um, Outside of the UK, there's very little regulation across the world.
yes,
So these things can just be
yeah.
implanted
I know,
willy-nilly, can't they?
I know. Yeah, I'd love to be able to design my own Amplats device and find some company in the world that makes it properly at a high quality and a quarter of the price. But anyway,
The Martin cylinder.
it's not going to happen, is it? But anyway. So, but yeah, I think that was the Amplats was a major milestone in PDA occlusion for sure. Yeah.
And how about other procedures? Are there similar milestones, do you think, in terms of either your experience or techniques or products available?
Well, if you look at the pulmonary, I only ever got as far as using balloons. But I never done a stent, so that might seem radical to me, and I don't know how successful that's going to be. I remember years ago when they were still doing surgery for PDAs. They were doing what you call the surgical shunt around the pulmonic stenosis. They cut it open. Remember scanning one of those dogs and seeing the backflow and thinking that's massive, isn't it? And the dog was going into right heart volume overload. So I'm thinking, what are these stents going to do? Are they going to cause that? But we'll have to wait and see what because you guys are doing this now. We need to see your audit and where we're going with that and how successful that is. And
Yeah, well, we're gathering data for a retrospective at the moment across
that's
a number
good.
of centres, which I think is going to be very interesting. I think from speaking to other people who are doing a lot of work with stents, it seems like you can have, Scansenal says you can have one bad valve. So
Mm,
if you've got very severe tricuspid insufficiency, they don't tolerate the
mm,
free pulmonary insufficiency so well.
mm.
I've certainly seen dogs. I mean, I've got dogs now 7 years out of stents that are not in right-sided failure and of course don't have a pulmonic valve because
Yes,
you've
yes.
obliterated it during the procedure. So
Mm,
it is a concern and it's definitely something that needs to be spoken about up front. Um,
mm,
but I think the one bad valve theory might hold true.
mm.
But we'll see. You mentioned audit, and I think that's a really important aspect of the work that you're doing now. From my perspective, is actually your work on clinical audit for
Mm,
interventional cardiac procedures.
mm.
Tell us a little bit about why you've become interested in that side of things
I,
and what you're working on at the moment.
I can't remember what triggered my interest because like all of us, we attend a lot of medical congresses and conferences and meetings as well, because that's where we learn from.
Yeah.
And I think somewhere somebody must have presented all this audit stuff. And then I got interested and curious about it and then followed up these websites where you can follow the audit of, human adults, a lot of coronary audit, but also pediatric as well. And I was just fascinated that this was all publicly available online. You may, as a
Mm.
member of the public, could view all this sort of data. But I was also astounded by the success rate the medics have. Their complication rate is so low, it's phenomenal. Typically less than 1% of people, that don't have a good outcome. And of
Yeah.
course, inevitably, everyone has a variety of diseases, and there won't be a good outcome because of the disease they have. But I just
Mm.
thought, I know what, it just captured my thought. I wonder if we could do that in veterinary, and also at the same time in veterinary, we had people starting to offer services at different levels of qualification, not just specialists. And it made me wonder. We could have some very good people who just has a certificate and are as good as the diploma holder. There must be another way to prove, are they doing it to the same standard or not, for example, regardless of what academic qualifications they were able to do or accessible to them.
Hmm.
And so between all that sort of merging of things, I just got interested into it. And it was before I left my place to go to Willows. And then when the Willows happened, I thought, well, there's a clean slate. Let's start doing audit from our cases at the start of Willows.
That's a nice idea.
As a prospective thing rather than a retrospective. And I thought, I could try and do this retrospectively, but it'd be a bit untidy. So we started from doing it Willows and tried to set it up. And yeah, I got some clever guys that do the Excel automation of calculations for me, which was great. We gave it a go. And initially there's always that this is new, why are we doing this? What are you doing it for? All that sort of hesitancy. Resistance might be too strong a word, but uncertainty why we need to do this. But I just found it fascinating, and we just went with it and developed it. And Chris Linney was working with me, and he was happy to follow and work along and say, yeah, I don't know what it's for, but let's go with it.
He does love a spreadsheet.
Does he? Okay. and that's how it developed, really. And then when I left Willows, I realized I'd collected all this data, but I'd not done anything with it, and I captured all that before I left. Then wrote that first paper on clinical audit and PDAs and thought that was interesting. And I did a lot of reading around that background and human stuff to try and write an introduction to try and explain it to everybody why we were doing it and that sort of thing.
To say it's really fascinating. We have talked a lot on this podcast about disease registries and I think disease registries and audits, clinical audits. I think it's really a shame that we have not yet developed big enough disease registries or audits as we probably should. And it's really cool that you have started doing that. So how do you first design a clinic audit if you decide regarding your PDAs? Because there is always this sweet spot about how much data you collect. Because if you ask for too much data, then people don't have the time. But then you also want to have enough data. How do you decide that when you start designing the clinic audit? How do you decide, okay, which variables are we going to check? How long are we going to follow these guys and so on?
Yeah, so I struggled with that originally as well. And a lot of it was based on reading what the humans were doing and looking at their data they were collecting. And they were into the complication rate after 30 days, the MESA, they call it, I can't believe the MESA, can't remember, it's a major adverse complication, whatever it was. And then I also, in trying to understand it, because it was a difficult new subject to understand, I went and attended a human course. So there was a NHS centre offering a course that I happened to happen upon. And I messaged him and say, look, I'm a vet, can I come and attend the course? And they said, yeah, of course you can. And so then I learned the foundations of audit, if that makes sense. Now, a lot of audit goes off to other things that didn't interest me, like the frequency of surgeons washing their hands, for example, in theatre, or the frequency of drip checkups or parameter checkups. There's all sorts of audit you can do, but I was interested in this outcome audit, as I would abbreviate it. And then the guys that taught that course, I kept in contact with them. And so then when I was putting things together, I was asking them for advice. And the general advice was, you have to keep it simple, because if it gets too complicated, like a research paper would do, people aren't going to do it. It has to be something that you can fill in within a minute or so before you start your procedure.
Right.
And so, and all questions must be binary, yes or no. You can't have a mild, medium, large. It must be a binary thing. So did the animal survive what? What did it survive? Did it survive the procedure? So is that a yes, no? Did it survive the procedure? Did it survive the procedure to discharge? You get an animal that can survive the anesthetic and then dies the next day. Is that a survival? So you set your criteria. So we said, let's say it survives the procedure to 24 hours or discharge. That was our criteria, for example. And then next thing is, did the procedure work? And to be honest, the only way you can know the procedure work is in follow-up. And that's the tricky bit. You can either say it worked at discharge, in the sense that for a PDA, when you scan it the next day, and mostly in my routine, I would scan the next day to stay in. I scan the next day and there's no ductal murmur and there's no flow and echo. And so that we define that as a success. But ideally, you want some sort of medium-term follow-up. But the longer the follow-up, if you have a follow-up of a year, you're going to lose way over half them. And especially the referral center, they're not going to, for cost reasons or for various life reasons, they're not going to come back. So you needed a short enough interval to capture as much follow-up as possible, but a long enough interval that represented was it successful. And that's a challenge. So we set it loosely between 4 months and a year. We quite loose in that. So as long as we get a follow-up in 4 or 5 months and everything was still good, we call that a medium-term success. But yeah, equally, when you talk to people, they want to keep adding more questions to everything. And it's it, as researchers, we want to do a lot of questioning, but as an audit, it has to be simply kept. We want a simple audit that says, are you successful and what's your complication rate? That's all you need to know. And if you flag up something that would be, let's say, outside the bounds of a normal distribution amongst different centers, then you can go in and drill into those cases and say, well, why is your complication rate either better or worse than everybody else? If you've got somebody with a complication rate that's so much better than me, half of what I'm doing, I'm thinking, what are they doing that I'm not doing? And vice versa, if my complication rate was twice as bad as somewhere else, I'd be thinking, what am I doing wrong here? So it's a way just to flag up as us who do these things to improve ourselves. So it's more for ourselves as much as anything else. But equally, if you now have different centers doing this that are, again, increasingly, whether it's a private center or now a corporate center, which have different sort of ethics, to a university center, we need to make sure that everyone is on the same ballpark, really. Have you ever watched the documentary about the 747 MAX called Downfall? That's about how Boeing founded its reputation on the ethics of the engineers that ran the show and developed the company until they were sold to a corporate and pension plans in America. And then the financiers then ran the company. And when the company became financially led, shortcuts were made. And that's the worry in veterinary. If we have a whole pile of corporates trying to financially lead us vets, we're in the making. We could have been making mistakes and problems. So it's another way of keeping control of all those sort of things, all those variables.
I think it's an important topic to try and not just identify that we can do something, but to gauge how well we're doing it from the perspective of the patient.
Yes.
Not just saying, "Oh, I'm doing 70 cases a year, fantastic," but actually, what's your complication rate? What's the outcome for the dog? Is it better afterwards than it was before? And is that improvement sustained? I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
I think there are some challenges there.
Sure.
That often really come down to the personality of the individuals who may feel like they are being audited in air quotes and inverted commas, because I think some people worry about the implication of not doing a good job. Again, I'm putting that in italics because I think people can be doing their best and they may need to refine their technique or have a little bit more support, as you were talking about earlier, training and not just an initial training course, but follow up, refinement, support. And it may be that if someone's complication rate is a little bit higher than the average, they need that. And hopefully, if there are structures in place to audit across multiple centers, then that's something where there can also be structures in place to support those people who maybe are not seeing the outcomes they want to see.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's potentially scary for some mindsets, let's say it that way. And it's interesting, in the human world, it's not compulsory. But and not every hospital center submits their audit to the National Institute of Clinical Audit. Not every, and I think the numbers like 80-90% submit clinical audit, and a lot of centers don't, which is interesting in itself. So it's still a voluntary scheme. But clearly, if we can get things rolling, there inevitably be a desire of a lot of people wanting to know for themselves, who are conscientious and ethical enough to say, "I want to know," and driven by those people. And then there'll be a degree of peer pressure. Well, everyone's doing it, maybe we should do it. But inevitably, there will always be someone saying, "Well, what if I have a handful of really, really bad cases that affects my complication rate more than everybody else?" But we all see those things, and they all average out. I don't think it'll make a big difference. And I don't think you're going to get a situation where people are going to stop doing the complicated one in fear of having a complication for their audit. I can't see that happening. Imagine you have a specialist referral center receiving a case, and they look at it and say, "Oh, that's way complicated. I'm not going to do it because that'll affect my audit." So what are they going to do? Go somewhere else? Well, then, if that happens, the referral practice is never going to refer to them again.
It's not just about the audit; it's about what's done as a result, isn't it? And it's the sort of availability of that data and impact of that data. And what the RCVS and Mark Morton have done with the cruciate audit, the cruciate surgery audit in the UK is really interesting, where the surgeon, I mean, it's very complicated. There are multiple layers of owner filling in various parts of the paperwork and the vets, the surgeons filling in parts of the paperwork. But ultimately, once a year, that surgeon gets data that says, this is your data, this is your complication rate, this is your surgery time, this is whatever, your recovery rate, lameness at 12 weeks, things like this. And they also then get the median for the whole country, and it's all voluntary. But the data is not made public. So actually, the surgeons aren't afraid to fill it in because there's no impact in terms of people being able to look it up and go, oh, surgeon, Barry down the road is not doing a great job. What the surgeon does is use the data themselves. If their complication rate is relatively high compared to the group across the country, then they can take action to do that, and they're offered support and further training and further conversations about it. But the data is completely anonymous and private. So I think that's really interesting because it feels like it captures a bit of the benefit for the surgeon and the patient.
Yeah, that sounds good.
It isn't public facing, but in some ways, I don't know if, certainly in the UK, I don't know if we're ready for that yet as a profession. I'm not sure.
No, I think that is a good way to start, and I think that's the way we should go as well. There's no point being public until we have big numbers and we're well established. If we ever go public, and that's not for my generation to decide, that's for the next generation to decide, I think.
What I love about it is one of the reasons I like to do clinical research is to make me think about the stuff we see every day, to go back and look at my data and remeasure stuff and then think, why did we do this, and can we do something different? And this audit, I think, is a perfect way to do that, to get better, to look for red flags, and also to look for those outliers, as you were saying. Because if I see these 2 or 3 PDAs of a very odd morphology that no one has had the time, because not all odd cases will be published, and people just write case reports about it. So I think these audits is really great to see what are we doing, where can we improve, red flags. And for example, reading your outcome clinical audit of PDA closure, something I thought was very interesting was the frequency of lameness post-PDA occlusion, which is something that we are always very worried about, but there's no publication about it. No one talks about it. We don't know how frequent it is. What are the causes? Because certainly no one has ligated the femoral nerve. Is something else. So I thought it was really interesting. As for example, as an example that, okay, your audit identified that the lameness was happening in X amount of cases, and then you can go and understand why does this happen. And so I thought, as an example of something that you can identify on these audits, and then we can chase and understand better what is happening and try to get better.
I can't even remember how many cases had lameness now. I can't remember from my own paper.
I think maybe 4 or 5% was not a huge number, I think. But then you went through the possible mechanisms. Yeah. And then you discussed the possible mechanisms because you had neurologists. Because for example, I just thought about that because maybe 2 weeks ago we occluded a PDA and then the dog was lame the following day. And then neurology assessed the dog and it said, no, it's completely fine. There are no deficits. The femoral nerve is intact. I said, what? But then why did this happen? And then and sides, then after 24 hours, the dog was fine. And in your case, you report a dog, 1 or 2 dogs with suspicion of venous thrombosis, which is something I've never considered. And I think it's just an example of stuff that this will not be published. People will not just put a case series about lameness in PDAs. Yes. And it's something the audit has identified, and then we can understand, okay, why did this happen? How and chase that. My question really was, Mike, as you have gone through all those courses on audit and so on and how to do it, something that I think is also very interesting is then to re-audit, and that cycle that you do audit and then you re-audit and do it again to see if things you identify areas that you could improve, and then you just re-audit. How does that work? What's the time frame? So let's say lameness, for example, you identify that. When do you want to re-audit your centers and your data?
Well, so the audit I'm trying to do will be continuous. So a lot of audit, you do a project, you set a junior doctor or vet off and do an audit of a subject, whatever that is. But it's not continuous. It's just that cohort of that 2 or 3 months. They're there. And then you would look at all the data, and then next year you'd have a different junior and you'd re-audit that sort of stuff. But I'm talking about doing this as a continuous thing. So it's continually audited. So there's no need to re-audit, so to speak. It's a continuous thing for every procedure. It needs to be filled in.
So I guess
Yeah.
it's a registry. We're talking about a registry which is then used to flag any changes in complication rate or spikes
Yeah,
for
yes,
particular
I
symptoms.
guess registry is another word to describe it, but in the human
Mm.
world, they don't use the term registry. So I know in the orthopedics they do.
And just thinking back to the PDA audit that you published, Mike, was there anything in there that surprised you? Was there anything that made you think, oh, that's interesting, I hadn't identified that on the road? Or was there anything that would make you change what you do or how you train people down the line?
I suppose I remember thinking actually the results were better than imagined. I always thought the numbers would be not quite as good as they were. I think, and that was a pleasant surprise. If that makes sense. And the complication rates weren't as bad as they could have been.
Hmm.
Because when you're doing all these things over years, the ones that go badly seem to dominate your mind, but they
Yeah,
don't
of course.
represent the percentage of cases that are there. It might be a bigger percentage in your memory, but not percentage in a number sense. If that makes sense.
Hmm.
Going back to another sort of the why we like it is interesting as well, because when I was learning from the humans, they were doing percutaneous occlusion
Yeah.
access. When I started doing that as well, we did it percutaneously, and we percutaneously went into the femoral artery or vein, but the vein wasn't so bad, but the artery was a problem. So and we would use a lot of hep saline in flushing all our catheters. But over the course of a long procedure, dogs may have received quite a lot of heparin. And I remember then when we were putting the pressure on the femoral artery, like I'd seen in the hospital, our dogs they didn't stop bleeding like humans
Hmm.
did. So in the human world, they put a thumb on there for about 10 or 15 minutes, and humans just clot. Our dogs did not clot. And
Yeah.
so we ended up at times putting pressure on there, have a visiting assistant usually, putting a pressure on there in a precise point and not just a bland fistful, but a thumbprint exactly where it is and holding it. We could be holding that for 30 to 60 minutes. And I remember thinking, this is not the way it should be in those early days. It shouldn't be like this. And so I think we had a dog that was a bit of a disaster. And after that, I thought I've got to think of a better way of doing this. And that's when I thought, why can't I cut down? Let's just cut down. And then, of course, then when you cut down, you think, do I repair the artery or do I ligate it? But I hadn't the skill set to repair it, so I had to ligate it. Yeah, and it went from there really. So basically, the reason we don't percutaneously do it to arteries in our dogs is they just don't stop bleeding afterwards. It's a real nightmare. Um,
It's interesting because there's a paper out there. I can't remember where from. I know that I reviewed it, so read it in some detail, and they were talking about comparing outcomes of percutaneous versus a cut down for PDA occlusion, and they didn't seem to have this complication from their percutaneous cases, and I just don't know why. Because everybody, I mean, I've never done it percutaneous, so I must confess I've always done it via a cut down. It's how I was trained, and everyone that I've spoken to who has tried in the past doing percutaneous approach have stopped doing it because they found that if there's not a hematoma obvious, they worry about a hematoma there or a retroperitoneal bleed with these cases. So you don't see it, but the puppy's losing blood into a hidden space there. So I think there's enough worry about it that makes me not want to go down that road. But I think some centers do manage to do it.
I think there's the other interesting thing is the awareness. It's a bit like sometimes you have a complication and it's recovered from anesthesia, and there's a complication that might have been anesthetic, but the anaesthetist doesn't know it happened. The nurse does. So
Right.
I've spoken to centers whereby and often I go and speak to the cardiology nurses.
Mm,
And sometimes our colleagues would be finished, do the procedure, and they're busy and they crack on with other things. But I say, yeah, you ever get any issues? And I regularly get nurses saying, oh, we have this issue, that issue. And I speak to the person involved, and they're not even aware there was an issue because the nurse never told them. So I've
interesting.
had hematomas described to me where the cardiologist wasn't even aware the dog had a hematoma,
Interesting.
and things like this. So there is that connection between the vet or the surgeon or whoever it is talking to their staff afterwards to say, was there any issues? And not all vets will lower rank staff openly talk to either. So there is a personality issue as well that all staff need to be able to be open and honest to the leader in that sense.
We're going into territories of philosophy, aren't we? But I think it has but it does have a practical application to the patient. It's about patient safety, and if we don't all feel psychologically safe and able to raise concerns or say, "Are you sure you want to use that in this situation?" I think actually it leads to poorer outcomes for the dog or for the cat, because obviously we do occasionally do interventions in cats. Then I think actually that environment, that ability of people to be open and honest and raise concerns without being shouted down is almost as important as the training and the practical skills.
It is. It is indeed.
We have been trying to do that with like the anesthesia team, because where I was trying in Zurich and it was too busy. Anesthesia was very busy. Cardiology was very busy. We never had the time really to sit and discuss the procedure and then go back and see what went well and what went less well. And now in the past 5 years, we've been doing that. And as you said, Mike, I think it's really important to give space for people to raise their questions and concerns, even before the procedure. So meetings with anesthesia for us have been, and with the nursing team, have been eye-opener, because they will raise questions of stuff that we have not thought about, or concerns that maybe we would not address. So I think that's really useful. I heard that, for example, in human cat labs, they will record every conversation in the cat lab, which is a bit like Big Brother, but they will record during their audits. They will record everything that is, and they will film and record, and then they will go back and listen to it, and just raise exactly that point, that everyone should have their saying, and we should listen to everyone. And that's.
I wasn't aware of that in the human world. I didn't see that. I haven't been into a human lab for over a couple of decades probably, but I wasn't aware of that. But I can well imagine. There's probably a defensive fear of something going wrong, really, isn't it? That it's there to watch, but whether you could do it in every case, I mean, if you spent 6 hours doing procedures, you can't be listening to 6 hours of tape to what you listen to. So maybe it's just for defensive cases, I guess, potentially. But I wasn't aware of that. Yeah, it's interesting.
I'm not sure if it happens in Europe. I know it happens in the US in human hospitals. So I don't know if there's a pressure about lawsuits stuff and so on, and people are more cautious. But I just thought was unbelievable that everything was recorded to that point, to know exactly everything that happened in theater or in the cat lab. But overall, very interesting. Are you planning to do other clinical audits, maybe in balloon valvuloplasties, other stuff, or are you sticking to PDAs?
Well, there was to be a plan. So as a team leaving Willows, we all agreed to do PDA, balloons, and pacemakers, and I took the PDAs. But unfortunately, the other data seems to have got lost. Unfortunately, but anyway, that's the human world that we live in. But it would be nice to get that going. So we are trying, and our VCS audit team, we are trying to get people to do audit for everything ultimately, all the interventions, and that'll include balloons as well. Yeah, brilliant. So I suppose the other thing to touch on, which I always find interesting, is measurement of things. And we've seen our surveys on VIN where we all do a blind survey and measure the left atrial diameter, and we all get different results, that sort of stuff.
Yes.
So when we're measuring a ductus and its minimal ductal diameter, or ostium, whatever you want to call it, I prefer ostium, or you're measuring a pulmonic stenosis, there's a huge variation in how we measure and where we measure and when to measure in systole, diastole, all that sort of stuff. The variation is tremendous, particularly in a deformed pulmonic stenosis. That is the biggest measurement of all. So when people turn around and say they're not getting good results with their ballooning, is it because their ballooning's no good, or because the measurement's wrong? And if the measurement's wrong, are they using a big enough balloon? If they have a sudden death, are they oversized the balloon? All those sort of things. And so that, I think that's a big issue, is how we all measure. And I think we almost need a discussion on a whole case example to say, where are you measuring this pulmonic stenosis?
And there's a huge hole for a consensus statement on pulmonary stenosis. I think, everyone uses different words for different morphologies, and I don't think we've really tried to have a consensus agreement on what words do we use to describe what we're seeing on an echo. So I think if someone says to me they're seeing a type A, probably I'm imagining they're seeing valvular effusion, and that's probably is what they're seeing. I think I trust that. But if someone says type B, I don't know what that means. And I think, now with more French bulldogs out there in the world, and a greater awareness perhaps of the different spectrum of morphology, I think we really need to do something. And part of that should be how to measure, when to measure, where to measure.
Yeah. And I don't think I could use vocabulary to describe it. I don't think I could physically describe it in a consensus statement how to do it. I could show you in a movie where I measure, but I couldn't describe how I do that. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And when I go to the different centers in Europe and Britain, or watch other centers, and as part of the training, I get them to measure it, and they're immediately thinking, even they may have watched me do a dozen or 20 cases, their first question is, where exactly do I measure again? And they've already seen me do it a whole pile of times.
Yeah.
And when I go to a different place where they're measuring, and I'm thinking, you're measuring there, why are you measuring there? I measure here, and I don't know that I do it right. But I would like to think that if my clinical audit and ballooning was good, then I must be doing it partly right, at least.
Right.
And that's the other reason I have clinical audit particularly for balloons is, if you're getting a poor outcome, maybe you're measuring wrong. It might be it maybe not be the balloon technique itself, it may be the measurement is wrong. And the other thing then is the opposite end is there's a lot of centers choose, just because of cost reasons, choose their target balloon. So whatever that ratio they choose, let's say it's 1/3 times the pulmonary annular diameter, they choose that target balloon. But if that measurement was wrong, they could accidentally oversize the balloon by a factor of 10 or 20%, which could go to the extent of rupturing or bursting that pulmonary artery if they don't step up. So if they choose a balloon that's going to be, say, 20 mils as their target balloon, but actually 1.5 times the annulus, which would be your critical maximum, that exceeded, then they'd be better starting to say, well, I think it's 20 millimeters, but let me start at a 16 and go 18 and then a 20. And if they've measured it correctly, they'll get to 20. But if they've over measured, they might see when they get to the 18, actually, that was a massive balloon.
Yeah, thanks for raising that, because we just behave that we just, I don't know, we just measure stuff, and we have discussed this in many different podcasts. We measure stuff and then we believe in that value.
Exactly.
And you are so right with LV wall thickness, with LA size. We are measuring things differently. We do measure things differently. So it'll be really important, as you were saying, Kieran and Mike, to have some consensus statement or guideline that say we will measure this way. And with procedures, as you were saying, the success of the procedure depends on the measurements, right? You can be the most skilled guy out there. If the measurement is wrong, then the procedure will not be successful. And that now that we generally use transthoracic, TOE, and angio, that's so interesting to me. How the value is different.
Yes.
Because when we measure on transthoracic, we generally try to take 3 balloons. We feel like, okay, we're going to have these 3 balloons. This is going to be around here. Or with the device on ACDO, we're going to have, okay, this will be around these 3 devices.
Yeah.
We have the others, but it will be around these 3 devices. And I love to do the exercise of which device I would have chosen with transthoracic versus TOE versus angio. And TOE is so clear, so clear when we compare with angio, so clear where we measure and so on. So just to say, it's so interesting, really, it's so interesting. And we should everyone work more onto that, to define how do we measure stuff, because that's fascinating. And the cardiac cycle, as it changed with the cardiac cycle, right? And very, very cool.
Yeah, so I mean, as a general rule for my angios, they generally measure bigger than echo, generally bigger. But I don't worry about which part of the cycle, but sometimes it's so deformed, you've got to choose an area that represents what you think is pulmonary annular diameter, haven't you? You can't always measure exactly that because it's so deformed. And you pick an image that represents that. But no matter how accurate, let's say you could be accurate, or you think you're accurate, and all those 3 techniques, you still you've set your target balloon, but I still think we should start with a balloon that's smaller than that for safety. And also that will reduce our baroreceptor response that triggers this suicide ventricle, I think. And I think since I've been stepping the balloons up, and it's averaging probably 2.5 balloons per dog, so I'm going 1, 2, 3, or just 1 and 2. I think I get less bradycardias as a consequence of doing that as well. But it's interesting. And then now people are switching to high pressure balloons, and I'm thinking, are you using a target balloon, a 20 mil balloon that might be oversized, but not only are you going to use a standard inflation balloon, but you're going to use one with an 8 atmosphere pressure, and you're going to inflate that with an insufflator. I'm thinking that's risky. That's just like, wow, that's just, I just can't see how that's going to not have complications.
I think that there is a problem there with new centers who are not experienced, who don't have the support and the training in the same way that you've described earlier on, where they don't know what can go wrong. And I think until you've experienced it or witnessed it, it can make you very brave.
Yes.
And then you face into it and you may not realize that actually you should have been a little bit more cautious with your approach. I guess, that's one factor. It's one factor.
Yeah. I think it would be good to someday bring a pile of movies, the VCS, some sort of thing, if our people are interested, maybe not for the whole audience, but for some of us, and just go through, where are you measuring? Where am I measuring? How are we measuring? Blah, 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 and that sort of stuff. But on videos that we can scroll back and forth.
I think that'd be very interesting. And I think all of us acknowledge from the work that's been done on variability, in to observe a variability of left atrial size measurement when you're doing left atrium to aortic root ratio. I think everyone at least now acknowledges there's variation, and it's actually a little bit difficult, that measurement, to get great repeatability. So therefore it makes people question it. And if they're questioning it, at least they're being cautious, at least they're double checking, maybe with a long axis dimension or a normalized dimension or whatever you want to do it, area or something, I don't know. But maybe with things like interventional work, we're not having those conversations between groups at the moment. And actually what we're doing is we're all working in silos, cracking on, thinking we're doing great, or maybe thinking, we're not getting those results we want them to. Why is that? And maybe it is something just as fundamental as a single measurement. We're not quite getting it right or getting it repeatable.
Yeah, it's hard to know.
If you could give somebody a top tip on measurement based on your experience, let's say for PDA, because I think pulmonic stenosis is harder. But let's say for PDA, what would you recommend they do to maximize their accuracy?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I go to a new center and they've measured PDAs for me and they give me measurements in advance, and I say, well, these are the range, like you take 3 sizes, Jose, and I agree. I would say this is the group we're looking to, it'd be one of these group of 3 or 4 Amplatzers. And then I come along and says, if you don't mind, I'll measure this myself, because I know this in my head is a big issue. It's probably the biggest issue when you do interventions is this measurement. And I look at their images, and the first thing is they haven't imaged the ductus as well as they should have done. That's step one. It's a skill that took me a long time to develop, and people aren't quite there yet. And the measurement they're measuring is a bit wishy-washy, a bit vague, a bit imprecise. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure about this. And then I'll show them how to get the view for the ductus. And so the first step is finding how to image the ductus on a transthoracic. On the TUA, it's brilliant. It's really good. But that's under anesthesia, of course. And then the transthoracic then, is getting that first image and showing them that. And then also not just the 2D image, but rotating 90 degrees to get almost a 360 perception of the osteal size as well, just to check it all out. And so that's step one. And then once you've done that, then I do it again, and people want to do it in color, but color bleeds. It creates a mismeasurement. So I prefer to do it in 2D.
Frame rate is not good enough.
Yeah, and then so I do it in 2D, and I scroll back and forth, and I scroll to say what I'm looking for, and I want to see what I nickname as the matchstick sign. So I'll see both left and right sides of the ostium on that 2D image, and I'll see a matchstick sign of both, and I'll measure to those points. And if they're not seeing the matchstick sometimes on the lateral wall, then it's not easy to put where you want to measure, for example. So yeah, measurement's a key thing. Is getting that step one, and then we go and measure on angio next. And it's really important to have a decent frame rate, fluoro machine, which is typically 30 frames a second. And we'll get a good image that flows through that ductus and show that all up. And we filled up the ductus in a nice contrast, and then find that nice image. And it may be, despite having 2 or 3 seconds of image, you may only have 1 or 2 frames that are actually measurable.
Right.
And selecting the right image to measure that, and then measuring from there. And generally, those two should be pretty close. But I more often than not would believe my echo rather than my angio, for example. I don't know if that answered your question. I digressed again.
No, but I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because the feeling that I'm getting from you is that it's multimodal. You're thinking about the echo. You're thinking about the angio. You're also applying some quality control.
Mm-hmm.
Do I trust that image? Is it what I expect?
Yeah.
So there's more nuance, isn't there, than just going, angio's better because echo tends to undermeasure. This is often what people say. And I mean, certainly for me, I think I would agree. I don't always go with the angio.
Mm. And then ultimately, my next checks for the Amplatzer is that we know the waist of that Amplatzer, and we know at the ampulla side of that Amplatzer its diameter from the data sheet. And then we implant that, we'll remeasure the waist, and that waist needs to be squeezed. So if we put in let's say we put in a 6 millimeter ACDO, if we go then and post implant before we release it, it still measures 6 millimeters. I'm not leaving it there because that hasn't squeezed in. That's not snug. It needs to be a bit smaller for me. It needs to be 10 or 20% smaller. So it's snug in, and I can see the arms, the ampulla side of the Amplatzer, I can see they're distorted and squeezed in, and they're snug, but without being over snug, if that makes sense. So it's just teaching those steps of, we've chosen this size, we put it in, is it the right size? And we do a recheck if that makes sense.
And we've already sort of mentioned how expensive those devices are. If you pull that device out, do you clean it and re-sterilize it and use it?
I do.
Do you show it as a teaching aid? Yeah.
No, I clean it. I clean it out quickly with a hep saline that's already there. I flush out all the blood in theatre and then pass it to my nurse to look after.
Yeah.
And she'll let it sit in some hep saline for a little while, and then we'll sort it out later, and we'll re-sterilize it and ethylene oxide it. But I do know that some people, I remember giving a lecture, and one of the cardiologists over there, big name over there, was absolutely shocked and frowned upon the fact that I would even do that. But I've been doing that, and I've never had a problem. I've never had a problem with a reused, re-sterilized Amplatzer, to my knowledge.
I think it's about getting it right, isn't it, and making sure you're not leaving microthrombin in there from one dog and then giving it to the next one.
Yeah. And the other problem is sometimes you measure an osteum, particularly in, say, a border collie or a German shepherd, which have big osteums or big ducts, and you've measured what you think you measure, and you put it in there, but the osteum seems so compliant and stretchable that it actually doesn't squeeze it at all. And you take it out and put a bigger one in, you think it's still not squeezed in, you take it out and put a bigger one in. So, I've been in a situation where I've gone 4 Amplatzers and 1 big German shepherd. And that would be a big cost in a private practice if I didn't reuse those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very valuable tips. Do you look maybe just for me, do you look at the distal disc? Because what you were saying, how much it squeezes, what I also look at, when I start looking at is how flat the distal disc is. Because when it's really squeezed, it's not completely flat, is it? So I like to see it open, because then I feel like it's really squeezing the waist.
Yes.
Right?
I like the distal disc to be a little bit opened, but not bulging, so to speak. And that's a judgment call, isn't it?
Exactly.
But it needs to be just slightly squeezed open. That's right. Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
I remember a case where I did leave one in that I wasn't happy with. Because we'd just had a nightmare with vascular access. The dog was tiny. Everything was, those procedures when you just think everything is against me, and I'm sort of getting away with it. So far we've done all right. We've done the troubleshooting, but I just thought, better's the enemy of good in this situation. And I just left it, and I was very uneasy about it. Dog was fine. The device was fine, but I was very mindful of the idea of residual flow in this dog, and what are we going to do with that if we do, if the ostium stretches a little bit over the hours post procedure and the device isn't snug enough, then actually I'm not so worried about device loss, but residual flow. And I just thought, am I going to regret that? Am I trying to make my life easier, make the dog's life easier, and actually endangering the situation?
Yes.
As it happened, I got away with it, but I did feel like I got away with it. I didn't feel happy walking away from that procedure. So I think sometimes, we should take the extra step if we can.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've in my very, very early years, I had lots of complications and learnt a lot. But one of the things I'm talking about, things that I see out there that makes me uncomfortable still to this day is in the human world, nobody does a power injection angiogram through an end hole catheter.
Right.
And we see it all the time in the veterinary world. Yeah. It's frowned upon. It's ethically not acceptable. It must be do a multi-hole flush catheter. And so a lot of humans will do it through a pigtail with multi-hole flush catheters. And for a PDA, that's probably fine because you're probably never going to do any harm. But if you have and I see this when I review papers as well in the images, people have done an end hole power injection into a pulmonic stenosis right ventricle. And that injection, and that, if a human ended up having a myocarditis or an inflammation in the right ventricular endocardium, that would be a case. I try to politely flag it up to the author and say, look, by the way, I noticed this just on the side. This is not something that the humans would accept anymore. But then again, if everyone in that center, in that world, in that continent is doing that way, and they're not looking outside their own little world, how are they ever going to learn? People have little habits that I see being done that in the world of human cardiology, where you're well trained, that would never be done. And the other one is a straight guide wire. Humans do not use straight guide wires except in an extreme, exceptional circumstance for anything. And if you're going to use a straight guide wire, it will be an extra floppy guide wire anyway. If you're reverse catheterizing a PDA for an ADO, you have to switch then. But they would never put a straight guide wire into a heart, a right ventricle, or anything anywhere. And you see straight guide wires all the time. But J-tip guide wires, the J safety tip guide wire, is trickier to use. So it does require that little different bit of skill set. But it's called a safety J for a reason. It is much safer than a straight. So the straight catheter, straight guide wires, I still see them in congresses and presentations, and I think, but how do we as a group of cardiologists get across the message about those sort of things? Maybe your consensus statement is an option there.
I think one of the difficulties, in my opinion anyway, with a lot of what we do is it's just very opinion based, and it's hard to get the research data. I think if you suggested, let's randomize cases to straight tip versus J tip, and no one's going to go for that. It's going to take a long time to get the data. The sample size isn't going to be there. The complication rate might be too low to pick it up without hundreds of dogs. But if a group of experts, experienced interventionists get together and have a conversation and say, okay, look, based on, our collective 120 years of experience of doing this, this is what we think is the best way to do it. And here are some hard no's. I think that's a starting point, and it might be the best we get, at least in the short term.
Yeah. Or we get a human interventionist to come along and give us a beginner's guide to catheters and guide wires that we should and shouldn't be using and complications thereof. And quite possibly in the early days of audit, all this was flagged up by their audit. I don't know where, but maybe it's flagged up by their audit or by, mortality or morbidity rounds that they had complications on, and that's flagged up and they've learned from that. But that's not in our radar because it's such a long time ago. But we somehow have missed all that, haven't picked it up.
Yeah. I think having consensus statements with a human intervention cardiologist. I believe the ECHO guidelines that John Bonagura and Virginia Luis Fuentes are working on, they have cardiology from the American Society of Echo as part of the guidelines. And so I think that, as you were saying, I think that would be very useful, because then you have a consensus statement with a human interventional cardiologist and saying what the guidelines is. Because I wonder, in some of those cases, that's how people were trained, and they are not aware that they cannot use an end-all catheter for an angio, and they don't know. and then hopefully the consensus statement would help with that. I think, yeah, that would be a way to do it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jose. I think it's how they were trained, but
Yeah.
it's also by who is that doing the training. Why do they not know? And in some ways, you can't blame the registrar or resident, because that's how they were taught by their mentor in that institution. But then why isn't the leader of that institution knowing this stuff? Why are they so parochial not to look beyond their boundaries? If that makes sense.
Yeah,
And maybe they've never, and I guess also they've never had a complication. I mean, I've again in my early days put straight wires in the pericardiums and out through pulmonary arteries, and I've been very lucky to get away with some of those things. You know, I've had to do a pericardial drain in the middle of intervention in the early days. It's, you know, and think, oh my goodness, you know, and then you go learning and asking, and I ask my human cardiology peer about that sort of stuff, and they say, we do never use a straight wire, and you learn all those things just by feedback and asking and being open and honest and confessing. And I go to my mentor, my human cardiology mentor, and say, look, here, this happened or that happened, and he would say, oh, you shouldn't do this or you should do that, or here's a way to do it. And he was always very open to help me in that sense. So I think I was very lucky in my days that I could get into the hospital. I could walk into the children's hospital without a chaperone. The receptionist knew me. I had my big box of chocolates under my arms. I'd walk up to the second floor in the lift, go into the changing rooms, put a blue scrubs on, and go in behind the theatre to the X-ray screens. And then they would say, hey, Mike, how are you? Here's the vet. Hey. And next thing I know, everyone down the corridors come for their biscuits and their chocolates and everything else. And how's it going? And what have you operated an elephant today? Or, you know, all this sort of jokes. Yeah. But yeah, those days, I was very lucky in those days to have that privilege. Yeah.
I remember there was once a human cardiologist coming to a CVM meeting that he said that they would have meetings just to discuss complications. A group of interventional cardiologists, everyone would just go there and say, I saw these complications in the past, whatever cases, and they would discuss them. I think to have a space for that, like in every meeting, to have a room where people could go, no blaming, share, this is happening to me. Have you seen these? And they may say, okay, maybe don't do that. I've seen that. Because again, these will not be published. People will not just publish complications and so, yeah, I wonder if that kind of open talk would be brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And
yeah,
my
mentor, Joe Giovanni, said the same thing. They used to fly off to somewhere, Switzerland or something, and have a weekend away, and they just talk complications. And the only caveat to the whole meeting was nothing left their four walls. It was all confidential. It was all to themselves. And the rest of the world didn't hear about it, but they learned about it. They learned the complications, and that influenced how everyone then learned how to do things. Yeah, absolutely.
I think I've worked for the last couple of years it is corporate practice, and Mike, I acknowledge your comments about the focus on profit margins and how that can sometimes hold back clinical development and training. Absolutely. It hasn't been my experience, but I do think it's about regional management and local management actually more than the corporate vibe, if you know what I mean. Where I'm going with this is to say that actually one thing that was incredible was the patient safety aspect and the focus on patient safety as part of quality. And I think that it takes training for individuals to learn how to present their own complications and talk about their own complications in a way that is not defensive and is receptive to feedback. But I also think it takes time to be trained to learn to listen to other people's complications without judgment. So I think there's a two-way training thing. I think, I reckon, certainly in the United Kingdom, if you take the average vet practice or the average referral practice, even more so, people are not ready for that. They don't have the training. They don't have the experience to have those open conversations. And I think there's a big space here, and there's a big opportunity for us, listeners, opinion leaders, if you like, within the field of cardiology, to try and develop that within our sphere, because I think it's really important, and I don't think we're good at it at the moment.
No, you're right.
Audit, I think, is the start of that, but the next level is actually people to learning to have these conversations in a constructive way. Because I've been to, we've all been to those M&M meetings, haven't we?
Yeah.
Where everyone feels
negative.
Yeah.
Even if you're not involved in the conversation, everyone's defensive. There are sides suddenly, and there's no learning out of it. And that's the worst thing that can happen with a complication of a procedure, is not to learn from it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And there's tons of famous quotes about mistakes. Like one by Oscar Wilde is, "Experience is the name we give to our mistakes."
Yeah, it's nice.
And there's lots of quotes on that sort of thing, but the only way you can learn is by learning from mistakes, doing things wrong.
Yes.
If everything went really well and very easy, and there's no complications, people get the false impression this is easy until they get the difficult case. So we need to be having a no blame culture, a bit like the airline industry tries to do as well, where there's a no blame culture. No one's going to be reprimanded. And the listener, as you're absolutely right, the listener has to be open and listening and empathetic and understanding it and discussing it rather than disrespecting someone for that sort of stuff. But yeah, we need that to happen as well, for sure. Talk about all those things.
Looking at the journey you've had over your career, what legacy do you think you're leaving behind, or what legacy would you like to be leaving behind for people in practice now and the next generation of the cardiologists? Or is that a too nebulous a question?
I think, like Yosi was saying, that we had a lot of people come to visit my practice, and I was always very open to people learning, and we did, clinical clubs and case conferences in the evening. Went to the Curry House afterwards, and we had a good team of guys that were always continually learning. The fact that I was happy to share and learn, but it's a two-way street, because all those people that came to learn, I was learning from them because they would ask me questions and they'd think of things I hadn't thought of. And so that's, let's say, student interaction I enjoyed, but equally, hopefully, the students all got something out of it.
I wonder if you did a survey of cardiology diplomats now across Europe, what proportion would have visited and seen practice with you?
Oh, a handful.
Because I'm betting it's high, 80%.
I don't know. Oh, I doubt it. I doubted that these days. I don't even know half of them these days.
Yeah,
they're a whole new generation of bunch now.
I speak to vets all the time, and they say, "Oh, you taught me when you were at Langford." And I go, "Oh, right, sorry." So I think, because I remember visiting when I was doing my certificate back in 2009, 2010 time.
Right.
It was, as Kieran was saying, was really inspiring to me. I was a vet in Portugal. I had just graduated. And then I visit you and Mike Jones, and I was like, "Whoa, I want to be like these guys. This is really cool." It was so. Yeah, thanks very much for that. It was really nice. It was a great week. Great
That's
week.
Good.
We don't.
I often think of Mike Johnson telling me that he was running to work and running again, and it turns out he was about 7 miles away from home. So he was doing like 12K each way, and it was just no sweat. Yeah. And recently I was thinking, I live 7 miles from where I work now, and I was thinking, oh, maybe I could aspire to be like Mike Johnson and run to and from work just once, so I could say I did it.
I think you need to be more gazelle-like than him.
Yeah, I know. I'm not gazelle-like. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. Absolutely.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
I hope it's been a positive experience for you.
Yeah. Hope you can use some of it anyway.
Oh yeah, I'm sure we can. We'll get a great episode out of it. Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem. All the best.
You have been listening to the Animal Heartbeat. Thanks very much for our listeners.
Keep in touch by finding us on social media or sending us an email on animalheartbeat@gmail.com. Please remember to like, follow, and share to help us find new listeners. And make sure to check out our previous episodes wherever you get your podcasts from or on our YouTube channel.